Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. And Andy sounds a little bit too enthusiastic for the stuff we have to talk about today.
Sorry, I'm trying to channel some positive energy here. It was a sunshiny day today. Got outside.
Indeed. Did a little photo shoot at the track. Had the boys running on dirt roads.
Yeah.
We'll get used to that in life. Yeah, you know, there's plenty of good things. But as many of you are experiencing, and just the world of running on the whole, along with the rest of the world, these are trying times. And they're the kinds of experiences that it's safe to say we're going to grieve and lament because there's a lot to grieve and lament, and we're going to try to make the best of it at the same time.
Absolutely. And this week we have a good podcast, I think, for these times. It's the second segment of the Hang in There stories from Olympic trials marathoners that we captured in Atlanta.
So if the first segment last week, and if you missed it, definitely check it out. You don't have to gain the benefit of this podcast episode. They're entirely separate, but they're just the same kind of thing. The first one being about hanging in there when training and racing and all that kind of stuff kind of hits the rocks a bit. And then this week, hanging in there when life hits you hard, and whether it's health and injuries and such, or things unrelated to running that impact running.
And a lot of us are hitting times like that right now. So we're hoping this can be an inspiration for us all.
So let's get started with the world of running content. Certainly on the negative side, as many of you know, just races canceled and postponed left and right. Very unpleasant for those planning and orienting your training around things, and especially as we're talking with and even as we're working with athletes and supporting their training and writing training plans and things. It just becomes hectic and chaotic. Like, what do I do now, and how do I try to navigate all of this? And by the way, I feel like I've been in the best shape of my life, and suddenly that race opportunity where I was going to get to kind of prove that training, it's just not there. And we don't even know exactly when the next opportunity is going to be, and that's probably even the hardest part about it. So if you have an upcoming race, especially if you were planning on racing in the next several weeks and it's been canceled or postponed, we certainly encourage you to try to find a way to salvage the training cycle with another race in the near future. But we're all kind of just going to wait and find out, because it could be something where we don't see racing again until summer.
So one positive thing or positive action that was a response to all of this was that the NCAA decided to give eligibility to their athletes for the spring season. So all athletes who would have competed this spring will get that season back.
Yeah, so the news there first was NCAA canceled everything on the spot on Wednesday. On last week Wednesday. So when that happened, that they were right about to begin the NCAA track and field indoor championships. Like, literally, some athletes were like at the track getting ready for their events. Not even kidding. So that's just incredible that just happens at so suddenly like that. So that was called off, and then the entire spring season for all NCAA sports was also called off. Now there's debate on whether they could or would give back eligibility for the winter stuff, because they had basically competed the entire season minus the championship, which is a bummer. But the spring eligibility they will give back, which makes sense, because really the function of how that works is if you don't compete at all in the season, then you can use that season at a later date. And so since no one's going to compete in the spring season, of course they can use that again. That makes sense. High school, however, is a little bit of a tougher scenario because, in high school, you're not counting it by number of seasons. You're counting it by how many years you're in school. So those high school athletes who had their seasons canceled, which is the case pretty much in every state in the United States, that's going to be, just kind of a heavy bummer. And, hopefully they can carry on their sport into the next step if they have that opportunity. So the marathons that we know for sure now have been rescheduled to Boston and London as far as the big ones. Boston will now be on September 14th. and London on October 4th, which puts them both right in that prime fall racing season because you've got Berlin in between, you've got Chicago right after London, New York, several weeks later. So that, of course, makes things busy, and now many of you are trying to make a decision because I know a number of you were planning on doing something like running Boston and then coming back and running Chicago or New York and all of that kind of thing. So it's now it's just going to be a question of how that will work out and shake out. So our condolences to those who lost that race opportunity this fall or this spring, but hopefully you can salvage it with another opportunity soon.
Yeah, and the many others too. There are a lot of races that have been canceled. So we did create a post about this subject. We had a lot of great advice from marathoners. We had 2 NCAA stars that gave their input and their motivations. So make sure you check that out too if you're looking for some positivity.
And we'll put a link to that on this episode's notes as well. So a couple of positive notes then. First, there was in fact still a championship race this weekend in the U.S., and that's because it falls under the parameter of under 250 people gathering. So now you say, what kind of championship race has under 250 people gathering? Well, it must be a trail race, and it must be an ultramarathon trail race, and indeed it was. It was the 50-mile trail championships, and held in the state of California with victors Tim Tollefson for the men and Ashley Hawks for the women.
Yeah, congratulations to you. And I'm sure that you had your social distancing during that race as well.
You were probably craving a little bit less social distancing in a 50-mile trail race. All right, so now the last bit here, I wanted to talk about this because I mentioned a while back the Japanese Olympic marathon trials. We were talking about that because the Tokyo Marathon, part of the reason why they still had the elites running in that, even though they canceled it for everyone else, was because it was part of the Japanese Olympic marathon trials.
Exactly. But it's confusing.
It's confusing, and it's also fascinating. This is the kind of thing I love. So I'm going to explain it as briefly as I can without too much detail. So here's how it worked. In September, they ran what was the official marathon trials race for the Japanese, similar to the U.S., where it's like a top 3 finishers, and those will be the Olympians on the team kind of thing. However, they have a kind of a stipulation where it's really only the top 2 finishers in that race that are guaranteed their spots. And then what they do is that third spot becomes kind of like a nominative spot where it can be beat out in future races. And then they have the Winter Marathon Series in Japan, where they basically have these 3 different marathons that are all candidates for kicking out that third spot. And here's how they have to do it. If someone runs that winter marathon and runs faster than the first place person at the trials marathon from September, then they become the new third qualifier. They kick out the previous third qualifier. So think of it just in terms of numbers. If I ran 2:20 and I won the trials marathon in September, and someone runs 2:19, they become the new third person, but they don't beat me out because the top 2 are guaranteed still. And the best part about this is that is actually exactly what happened in the women's side of the race.
Wow. Really
quite incredible. And let me go to that article for you for a moment so I can actually explain it in the situation because it was incredible. Mizuki Matsuda was running. She was the 4th place finisher at the trials marathon. So she's the alternate, right? Because she finished 4th in the trials race. However, later on in the winter, she proceeded to run. What was her time? It was crazy. She ran 2:21:47. And
so fast.
Consequently, beat the previous women's victor, which was 2:22 and change. So she became the new 3rd place qualifier. So she went from 4th place alternate to 3rd place qualifier, and unfortunately might have jinxed herself after the race when she made the comment that there's nobody else in the country who can beat that time. That was a direct quote. We'll post a link to this article. And then, not long after, so this was Mao Ichiyama runs 2:20:29
so fast
to run a new fastest first place time, which then also kicks off the 3rd place finisher or the 3rd place trials qualifier back to the 4th place alternate position. So this woman, that's just what a trials to have to go through for these trials.
Yeah, their Olympic trials is more of a trials.
Yeah, it's really something. So I personally, I think it's kind of fun to have intense dynamics possible and present with these kinds of things. The reality is you have to have the right mixture of competitiveness and that kind of a thing for it to really matter. Otherwise, it just becomes like kind of a formality. But
I think it's making them great. I think it's probably pushing the Japanese to get faster and faster.
Listen, we've mentioned this in different places before, but Japanese marathoners have the magic. They really do. You can talk about, what are the great origins of marathoners, on the whole, nationality-wise, and you certainly have East Africans kind of dominating the scene, but the Japanese they're right there. Mm-hmm. They don't get all the attention because they don't have the fastest of the fastest times necessarily. They're not breaking world records left and right, but they're certainly right there. It's exciting. Okay, so that kind of rounds it out for the things we wanted to try to share here. Of course, there's so many other things going on with schedule changes that there's just too much to try to address here. But if there's one in particular or something else going on and you want to post it or share it in social media, and we'll kind of pay attention to those things too. We've got some races coming up that we are planning on doing, and we wanna start as soon as possible. We want to start kind of broadcasting what events we're going to be at and try to kind of rally some support. And we talk about bringing community together. We want to try to bring attention to some of these things too, but we're going to hesitate just a little bit longer because they're within that window that we might see some more changes in that schedule too. So we'll keep you posted. So for this main topic, just like last week, we are going to play for you a series of brief reflections from these Olympic trials marathoners, different ones than last week, and sharing how they have dealt with and coped with life obstacles that influence and affect running. Some of it's like injuries and health issues. Some of it's like family situations and internal struggles. And there's just all the kind of stuff that we have to deal with in life that does affect and influence our running. And in some ways, you kind of turn that table over and say, life happens, but running can actually be an opportunity to cope with or engage with the challenges of life at a different level. And that's one of the things that we have found, Andy, as in our own engagement with the sport, is not that we try to use running as medicine, because that isn't always a healthy way to approach these kinds of things. But in the same sense, it can be medicinal. And that's with how you allow it to engage better with your sense of self, with your sense of others. We talk about like community and those things. And for us especially, it's been an opportunity to help center our identities. And we use prayer and meditation to do that as we're running a lot as well. And so those are the kinds of things that when we reflect on how just life hits us hard, running can be one of those things that we have found to help navigate some of those hard hits of life, like what everyone's going through right now.
Yeah. And on the flip side, too, when things are hard in our running, it tends to affect the rest of our lives. So being able to process through these hard times and hang in there through all life circumstances, it's part of our life and who we are.
So let's get into the first one here. We've got Dylan. Andy, tell us about Dylan.
Dylan Bells runs for Brooks Running, and he is currently training in Flagstaff, Arizona. This is a guy who grew up playing lots of different sports. He had 7 in total that he ran in high school. So he found running as a way to get in shape for wrestling.
Ah.
Yeah.
I had teammates like Dylan.
And then they ended up finding out they're really good at it. So Dylan went from his junior year running 1909 to running 1648 his senior year. So that's within 1 year improvement.
That's not bad.
That's not bad at all. So
nice work, Dylan.
Yeah, nice work, Dylan. So yeah, like I said, now he runs for Brooks, and he's in Flagstaff, Arizona.
All right, let's hear Dylan's thoughts.
So my hang in there moment starts a little bit before I began running. So in my early childhood, I struggled a lot with depression, anxiety, a lot of issues that unfortunately put a big damper on my mental health. One of the bigger things that came out of this was a relatively long-term eating disorder during my early childhood and into my late teenage years. Unfortunately, this wasn't occurring in synchronicity with running and training. This has all happened before running. So I found running as a means of helping myself overcoming these specific issues that I had with myself and my self-perception and expectations and all these things that I had placed upon myself. And unfortunately, I had bottled it up in a very unproductive and unhealthy manner. So my hang in there moment would be to talk to those who are going through similar issues. It doesn't have to be an eating disorder like myself, but it could be anywhere on the mental illness, the mental health side of things. And one of the things I like to encourage other people is that to go and look for help, not only from other people, but within yourself. I think it's humongous. It's a huge thing, especially in this time where we are so accustomed to social media presences and how essentially that has affected our lives. And it really has taken us away from our realities and what is real. And so I encourage those who are going through such stages at their points in life that you don't give up, that you continue to find ways in which you can better yourself. For myself, that was being able to reach out to other people, talk to other people, see the right people. I saw a therapist. I've been to doctors. I've been on and off different medications to help me to get myself through these things. And these are all very important to have people in that circle. So I want to tell people that if you're going through something like this, don't give up. It's very easy to wake up and not feel like you're worth anything, or you want to do anything, and you feel terrible about yourself and you feel terrible about the world. But there is another side of that, and I'd like to be a part of something along those lines. I'd like to be one who can help reach other people, because I've met my better half, my better self on the other side of this, and it's a lifelong journey. It's never over, but it's something that is worth the time, worth the effort, and worth every single mental and physical effort, capacity that you have to put into it. So
I can really appreciate, and we just keep highlighting this because it's just so key, that dual reflection of how to center yourself as well as engage with and reach out to others, when we're dealing with stuff. I love the comment, like, we are social creatures. I love that phrase, but the reality of that phrase is just the sense that we get a lot from other people, and we don't even always necessarily know exactly what we're getting from other people, but we know that there is importance in engaging with others, and that there is some kind of negative fallout from isolation. So we want to find ways to engage with people, and especially, as Dylan was sharing, that can be very difficult when times are tough. But to do so can pay off, can benefit in great ways. So let's talk about Joe.
Yeah. So Joe is a friend of ours.
Joe Nemec.
Joe Nemec. Yes. We talked about him in the podcast about the Chicago Marathon.
So he was the one that I had run with, and we both kind of fell apart, both of us. And then he was the one who doubled back on Houston and ran 2:17 to successfully qualify for the trials. Yeah,
and he dug super deep. There's a picture of him, Runner's World. He's kind of visually famous. He has a sweet picture at the end there. So check him out at Joe Nemec on Instagram. You'll find that photo.
So as you might guess, Joe has some hard life-hitting stuff to share as well. So let's hear from Joe.
Yeah, so a couple years back, I think it was 2017, my second son was born with a malrotation of his intestines, and he was in the hospital, and so this kind of all happened suddenly. It was like a shock, and I had a race. It was the Riverbank Run, 25K, 5K, 10K, double that I was planning on doing that weekend, but earlier in the week we found out that my son was going to the hospital, so I think just that race, being in the moment and just thinking about my son kind of in his struggle, and just being able to kind of hang in there and finish the race strong for him. I ended up winning both of those races, so that was just kind of a special moment, and just hanging in there and how cool the sport of running is. I mean, yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind when I was talking with Joe about this for this episode was I remember when that happened. So he was talking about it. We were at that race. I don't know if I ran the 25K or if I was just there spectating, but I was there, and I remember when he told me that, I've got my kid's in the hospital. I don't really know what's going on and stuff. And I'm like, man, how do you turn around and focus and try to race when all of that's going on? And it's, that's just hard to do. But in some ways, his point was like, he knew that there wasn't really much he could do for his kid at the time. Like, his kid's in good hands, in the hospital, not in critical state, and he could trust that they're doing their best to take care of him. And so he just was able to turn his mind into the race and really just dial up a hard effort, which is really something.
Next up is my roommate from the trials, Katie Kellner. She is from Boston. She trains in Boston, and she is with the BAA group there. I had the pleasure of getting to know Katie and celebrating her success in the sport. Let's hear from Katie.
In last winter and spring, I was struggling with anxiety and panic attacks, and that was something I never experienced before. And the physical sensations of the panic attacks, like hyperventilation and a rapid heart rate, mimic the sensations of running hard. So even though the anxiety had nothing to do with running, I was unable to run hard because those physical sensations then made me feel that mental panic and anxiety. Definitely a lot of therapy, learning, not practicing with people around, initiating those sensations and not connecting them to the mental state, and also having training partners to run right with me and make me feel comfortable.
So that's a big obstacle, as Katie was articulating there. Just trying to find a way to separate the physical sensation of running from a very negative physical sensation that she experiences in other contexts. That is tough.
Yeah. I have had similar struggles with this, and I had a coach that really dialed into that with me. And it's such a difficult thing. So even now, mentally, sometimes we can put ourselves in a spot where we're like, we can channel this to excitement. Anxiety and excitement are different things, but the physical sensation in our bodies is the same. So anyway, I really admire Katie for being on the forefront of having this conversation, because there's a lot of us that struggle with anxiety. So I appreciate you, Katie.
So next we've got Nathan Martin, and you heard us talk about Nathan in the Olympic Trials Marathon preview episode, because he's one that was kind of a local competition in college. We weren't necessarily rival schools, but we saw each other quite a bit and got to know him a little bit, in competition. But I think I've gotten to know him a little bit more through other people more than anything. And just, kind of what a story, going from not necessarily like, the top tier athlete in college, just working his way up and 1 year after the next, moving through the sport.
Well, and did end up getting 3 national championships out of that.
Absolutely did.
He was 3-time national champion.
And he really just kept going. That was the thing that I always have appreciated about following his career. So he is going to share with us then kind of how life hit him in the worst of ways.
So probably the biggest hang in there moment I've had in the last 6 to 7 years probably would have been the passing of my parents. So it was just a really rough time in my life. Obviously, there's not a lot of good that can come out of your parents passing. But what I was able to find through it was just my teammates and just the people around me who really supported me through that time. Because it's one thing to be part of a team that you reach out and you do things for people, but it's a whole nother thing when they reach around you and show you that support. So that was really big, and it really helped me get through it. And ultimately, I know my parents will want me to push forward and do my best for them.
So talking with Nathan before he actually got on the mic and recorded, I told him, I said, if you don't necessarily want to share this right now, I certainly would understand. He basically said, this is an important thing to share because, he's not the only one who experiences or has experienced loss, and even loss in the form of death. And how do we deal with that? How do we cope with that? And I think he said it well when he just said, there's not much you can do to make something like that better. And you're not really trying to make that better, whether for yourself if you've experienced it, or for someone else if you're trying to comfort or, come alongside them. But the thing that matters is that you're with someone. So when I see that in a friend, or I see that in someone else, I can just be with them. And that's huge. And that applies to so many other things too. I mean, when we experience struggle, the thing that matters the most is that we feel like we are not alone.
It's a good lesson to us all. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Nate. Next up is Obsi Biru, and she was also an NAIA national champion. It was great to see her at the trials. I had been following Obsi for a while just because she's had so much success post-collegiately, and she has so much joy in her. And I feel like her joy is a gift to the world. So I appreciate her using her talent and her ability to elevate others.
Let's hear from Obsi.
My hanging there moment, especially for this race, would be my kiddos. I used to work with special needs kids, and so I'll be thinking about them as I run my race this weekend, running a mile for each one of them. I've worked with 26 kindergartners, but not all of them were, special needs, but all of them have, had special influence on my life.
So much wisdom to be had from Obsi. Focusing on others can give us purpose beyond the sport.
Definitely. And I when I was talking with her, when she first mentioned, I'm going to run a mile for each of the kids that I work with. And I was like, well, how many kids do you work with? Because, in my head, I was like, there's no way it's exactly 26 kids, right? And she's like, no, yeah, I work with 26. And I was like, great. She probably thinks I'm dumb now that I said that.
That's cool.
But yeah, the numbers just, happen to work out that way. But it's really, it's a great thing to be able to connect the interests and passions you have on the run with those you have off the run. So we got Aaron next.
Yeah, Aaron Dinzo. He is from Sydney, Ohio, and now lives in Providence, Rhode Island. And he's been running since he was 13 years old. And over the years, he has had a lot of encouragement to take the sport to higher levels. And in doing that, it's increased his love for the sport and the excitement that comes along with it. So Aaron's had great success in the sport, but he's always been full of gratitude for the people that have been in his corner.
So I've dealt with injuries a lot over the last 5 years, really since my last year of college, and a lot of ups and downs with that process of trying to be healthy and being competitive in the sport. And I would kind of say when you fluctuate a lot with your health, I think your mind tends to follow, and I started to find myself not having control over that. And I think the thing that comes to mind right now is my last kind of major injury I had over last spring. I had a good chat with my coach when it kind of all settled down, and the topic, the big conversation over how we get through these things was just ownership and owning your situation and kind of being grateful for it. Everything is an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to continue to press forward. These are challenges and obstacles to get through, and they help define you as an athlete. So I think in the last 6 to 8 months really, that has built a better foundation for training, for what I've just been doing in life, the way I see my team, the way I see my coaches, and just kind of the gratitude I can have now for being able to run, and the minutes that you get to have and just lace up your shoes and go and be at an event like this, because I think it's so easy to feel like you're falling short when you don't feel like you're getting 100% out of running.
So that's a message that I personally can probably take to heart more than I do, which is just simply that challenges, you own it, and then you try to learn and grow from it. In most cases, I try to just get past the challenge as quickly as possible, just move on. And that's not necessarily always healthy, because a lot of my challenges I've experienced as it comes to running and life are repeat offenders, if you will. So I should probably learn from Aaron's wisdom.
Yeah, I really like that too, the taking ownership of your situation, because I'll admit too, sometimes I try to become a victim of my circumstance when I'm feeling kind of hopeless. And I feel a better step would be getting rid of denial, taking ownership of whatever the circumstance is in order to move forward. And that's where the next step comes in.
So this last one here, we have Danny Cook.
It's been amazing to connect with Danny. I have seen her run the 10K on the track, and wow, she's a speedster, let me tell you.
Yeah, that was a decade ago, too, wasn't it?
I know. So, yeah, it's been great to connect with her in recent years, and she's now training in Fort Collins, Colorado. So she's run with Indiana Elite, with Brooks. She had her debut marathon in Columbus. She's been chasing the trials. And then she got pregnant. So that's part of the story. It doesn't take away her speed, but it definitely comes with challenges. I know from personal experience. And she has overcome. Let's hear Danny's story.
My hang in there moment is probably a series of small moments, really. I had a baby in April of 2019, so I'm 10 months postpartum. And the comeback was a lot harder than I had anticipated. I had a C-section. And so I think my biggest priority going into the training block was to get here healthy, because you can't run and enjoy the experience if you're not here. But as I got back into training, I had a lot of bumps. I had a rib that kept popping out of place, and just trying to figure out feeding schedule of the baby. And I just had a lot of weird injuries pop up that made me feel like I wasn't going to make it here. But I just kept telling myself that it took me 10 years to qualify. And I just really wanted to do what I could to be here and be healthy, and be patient with my body. And I think that patience really gave myself the opportunity to recover at the rate it needed to. And the last couple weeks, training kind of just took off on its own. And so kind of that hang in there moment was just being patient with myself, which I learned a lot through pregnancy. But I think I learned it even more postpartum and getting here. So
that's kind of, in some ways, it's like worst case scenario when, a good thing happens, but it has bad consequences on something you enjoy, because you feel good about the good thing, but then you're frustrated by the negative fallout. And that's kind of the situation as she's described it, with just these ongoing issues. And it's just a frustration that, you want to build towards something, but then something interrupts it again. And you just keep experiencing that. It's very difficult.
Motherhood is a series of interruptions.
Oh, now that's a good life lesson.
It is very true. And I admire Danny so much for the drive and excellence she's pursued, and how she's been patient with herself coming back, and the amount of speed that I've seen on some of her workouts. And I look forward to continuing to follow Danny's journey.
Definitely. And that patience, that's key.
Yes, patience pays off.
So all told, the message here is clear. And that is that life hits us hard, and sometimes that is within running for those of us who pursue and enjoy running, and sometimes that has nothing to do whatsoever with running. And let's zoom out even further. Whatever your passions and interests, when life hits hard, those things get disrupted. It's just simply the way it happens. And in so many ways, there's only kind of a small set of, if you will, solutions to help us overcome these kinds of things. And those solutions tend to involve things like connecting with other people and trying to establish community. Those solutions involve trying to learn from our challenges and obstacles to overcome them and own what we can, and what we can't own to grieve and lament it, and then try to move on to the next thing. And in so many ways, that's a challenge whenever it happens in small senses. But in a time like this, if I can just comment one more time, Andy, what do we do in moments like these, moments where community is being constricted and in some senses cut off, where the goals and dreams that we have are being interrupted, not really because of anything that we did or any mistakes that we made or even anything that we're directly involved in, but just simply because of the product of something uncontrollable. What do we do?
Hang in there. Keep hanging in there, all of you at home that are listening, or maybe you're out for an isolated run. Hang in there. And if you want to connect with us, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to brag about your runs because you're not getting to prove your fitness in a race, we'll hear it. We won't judge you for that. So yeah, please connect with us at AtoZrunning. That you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the places.
Yeah, and let's hit those places hard right now and find and encourage and inspire each other. Because even if you can't get there in person to do those things, it's still possible. And that's one of the wonders. You'll hear me kind of talk strangely about social media. Like maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't see why it's such an amazing thing for so many people. But in reality, it is an opportunity to connect that cannot be interrupted by even something like a global disease phenomenon. And that's something. Yeah. We should not underestimate that. So get online and make that social media sphere a place of love and hope and passion. And let's keep the fire burning, because we're going to weather the storm. We already know that.
Yeah.
We're going to weather the storm. It's just a question of what we are when we come out on the other side.
Absolutely. So this is a great time to message your friends, but also take some time for some self-reflection. See what obstacles you have to take ownership of and hurdle them. Get over them. Seek help when you need it. I'm talking to myself there too. And then also provide that support for someone else.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get through this thing together, so stay online with us. We're going to be talking about more inspiring things and trying to capture more and more of your stories so we can broadcast those things here.
Absolutely. And I do have to mention one more thing. We do have the athlete bios on our blog post associated with this podcast.
AtoZrunning.com/episode 24. That is a 24.
Check them out there.
Hit us up on social media. Find us at AtoZrunning.com/subscribe, and you can follow everything that's going on here as well. We'll talk again soon.